I don't know about you, but when I heard the news this morning that Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was on a plane and I saw the picture of her on that plane, I wanted to cheer. It was a bit difficult because I was in a TV studio at the time, but those were the emotions that were running through my head, because those of you that have followed her story over the last few years, I think, wondered whether this day would ever come. We hoped it would, we prayed it would. But when you look at the circumstances of her incarceration, it was easy to believe that she might never come back. And every time I interviewed Richard Radcliffe, her husband, I just kind of always, I know it's totally inappropriate, but I wanted to hug him as he walked out the studio. Totally sort of silly thought in a way. But I think we all came to really admire his stoicism, his campaigning ability, his ability to keep her story in the media and on the front pages. And there were lots of politicians trying to put pressure on to make sure this happened. Pressure on the government, pressure on the Foreign Office. I think Richard's local Labour MP, Tulip Sadiq, deserves a medal for the efforts that she's gone to try and secure her release. And today it happened, and Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, has issued quite a lengthy statement about the release. Now, cynics will say, well, she shouldn't be taking credit. Well, it has happened under her watch. It should have happened before. It should have happened under Boris Johnson's watch. I don't think it's controversial to say that his period as Foreign Secretary, it wasn't his finest hour, particularly with regard to Nazanin's situation. Jeremy Hunt didn't pull it off. Dominic Raab didn't pull it off. But it has been pulled off now. And it's quite clear that one of the reasons is because of the tenacity of the Foreign Office diplomats who've been in Tehran for the last few months. But also, I mean, let's not ignore the fact that we have now paid this £400 million to Iran, which has been owed since 1979. Now, the easy conclusion to draw is, well, if we'd done that 6 years ago, she wouldn't have been in prison for the last 6 years. I'm not actually sure that's the case. The problem was that if we paid that money, it might go against the sanctions which America and many other countries, including us, have imposed on Iran. Now, they have found a way through that now, and it seems as though this money is going to be paid in things like medical supplies.
Mike Pompeo, the former US Secretary of State, says the fact that UK paid out nearly £400 million is, and I quote, blood money. What would you say to the former Secretary of State to that?
I would say it's not. I would say that there was a legitimate debt that we owed the Iranians. It's been a problem in Anglo-Iranian relations for a long time. And I think that it's right that in the end we have paid that with certain assurances about how the money will be spent. There's a confidentiality agreement between the UK and Iranian governments, which means that I can't really go into the detail of exactly what those conditions are. And separately, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and other UK nationals detained in Iran have been released. That's the situation.
Can I ask you, if Nazanin was in front of you, or you were able to meet her now, apart from giving her a hug, what would you say to her?
I would say, well done. You've come through a tremendous ordeal. And remember also that whilst it's been a period of suffering, and it's been real suffering, a real hardship, a real difficulty. Remember that within suffering, there are always to be found the seeds of hope, the seeds of something new, the seeds of something creative. Look for those and develop them, because you will find that rather than this experience bringing you down, if you look for it, you'll find that it will have enhanced you in certain ways. In my case, I'd always had sympathy for those who are on the margins of life, those who find difficulty. But that sympathy was changed or deepened into empathy, not just to feel sorry for people, but to know what it's like to be kicked around, to have nothing, which then propelled me in the rest of my life in a new direction. And that's what this experience can be. It need not be totally negative.
What do you suppose it was? What was the skill set that Liz Truss brought to the table, and with your support, to actually make it work this time?
Well, this has been a piece of work that every foreign secretary has worked on. All her predecessors have worked on. She reaffirmed that it would remain a top priority for her tenure as Foreign Secretary. The change of government in Iran, I think, gave us an opportunity to reset the relationship. We had the first ministerial face-to-face meetings, her with her opposite number, me with my opposite number, for the first time in over 3 years, just at the tail end of last year. I think those things have helped. But ultimately, this has been the culmination of a lot of hard work by a lot of people and a huge amount of dedication and passion by the families of those people incarcerated.
And we should just say that her stewardship of the post as Foreign Secretary has been considerably more successful than that of Boris Johnson. He probably held the whole affair back, didn't he, with his comments?
I don't think his comments made a single bit of difference at all.
Really?
There were a number of people held in arbitrary detention in Iran, people of other nationalities as well. The charges against them we have never accepted were legitimate. The Iranians could and should have released them much, much earlier. And frankly, they didn't need an excuse to do this. They have applied, as I say, completely illegitimate charges to a number of people. I have no doubt his comments made no difference whatsoever.
I should have been freed 6 years ago. I should have been freed 6 years ago. Of course she should. If you want to know what gammon-infused trolls and sundry other racists are saying, there's an argument that EU sanctions prevented the debt being paid for all of this time, which kind of makes one wonder why successive foreign secretaries tried so hard to get it done, or people like Alistair Burt, a former Foreign Office Minister, have explained at great length that it could have been done at pretty much any point previously. So you can swallow the lie, whatever you want, but the minute you say it out loud or the minute you say it in public, you become a victim of the lies you've been told, and you become a liar, I'm afraid. I know that's tough some mornings to swallow, but there is truth and there is untruth, and if you can hand on to the truth, even if you are the only one, you will not go mad. So I read that from let me get this right, the leader of the GLA Conservatives. She's been free for what, 3 days, 4 days? Not yet a week. And the leader of the GLA Conservatives is already queuing up to tell Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe to know her place. Liz Truss presumably was expecting yesterday to get some sort of round of applause from Nazanin. She got some credit and some thanks from Richard, who of course spent a long time being told by the Foreign Office to pipe down, to wind his neck in. His vociferous campaigning was in direct contravention, certainly in the early days, with what he was being told to do. It's almost as if we've all forgotten that a matter of months ago, he was sitting outside the Foreign Office on hunger strike. Such was his desperation to see the UK government do more. And listen, I spoke to him. I went to see him. We had him on the show a few times. And when he wanted the British government to do more, what he wanted them to do was pay the money they owed. Here is, just in case you need extra sources, here is Alistair Burt, previously a Foreign Office Minister. He said the UK government has known for many years that if it paid a £400 million debt to Iran, it was likely to lead to the release of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. And that is the former Foreign Office Minister Alistair Burt in a letter to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. He is also calling for an inquiry into why the debt was not paid and into who, either in the governments of the UK or the US, resisted making the payment. So in this sort of Trumpish world now that Johnson and his client journalists have created, the same world in which the absolute outrage of riding roughshod over all of the rules that we obeyed to immense personal cost doesn't matter anymore. It was just some warm Prosecco and a party popper. The same client journalists trying to create that absolute madness of a myth are also trying to pretend that Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe should somehow be grateful for the fact that it only took, well, let's say 6 years as opposed to 6 days for this debt to be settled. Possibly I'm being a little bit naive, a little bit simplistic, a little bit, I don't know what the word would be. 10 minutes after 10 is the time. But the other question that then comes into play is, she's just right, isn't she? Imagine it was you, or your wife, or your husband, or your mum, or your son. I don't know, someone you really love. You might hate your husband. Someone you really love. Imagine it was them. We know now, as a consequence of what has happened, that it could have happened at any point in the last 6 years, right? We know now that Liz Truss, inexplicably and unforgivably, tweeting a picture of herself instead of a picture of the Ratcliffe family, the Zaghari-Ratcliffe family, when the news was first. And I'll say that again because I have to pinch myself sometimes at this current stage in the political cycle in the United Kingdom. The current Foreign Secretary decided to tweet a picture of herself when Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was released, instead of a picture of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. I mean, who wouldn't do that? Seriously, someone's been imprisoned, including solitary confinement in an Iranian jail. They get released as a consequence not of any particular diplomatic effort, it would appear, and I, like Richard, felt initially warm towards Liz Truss over this. It sounded as if she had managed to move mountains that previous foreign secretaries hadn't managed to move. But all that happened here is that a £400 million debt that dates back to the 1970s got paid. And therefore, as most people apparently with a functioning brain in the Foreign Office have known all along, therefore, 2 of the hostages were released. It looks like the Iranians played a bit of a fast one with the 3rd hostage, poor blighter.
OK, what are you going to tell me about Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe?
She didn't come across as a sort of victim. She came across very politically orientated. Did you not think, Nick?
I'm loath to ascribe any negative sentiment because the poor woman has just endured 6 years in jail. What I will say is there might have been a degree of more gratitude, possibly.
Okay. Do you think that she'll give the money from the Hollywood blockbuster and the book deal to charity, or do you think she'll keep it?
I have no idea, and it's difficult to say. What do you? I would hope perhaps she'd do a split, some for a charity for refugees or those who are held in torture or whatever, and some for herself. What do you say?
I say she should give all the money back because she's, unfortunately, as a lot of people say, if you don't go somewhere, you don't get in trouble in the first place. So if she hadn't have gone to visit her family, she wouldn't have got in trouble in the first place and wouldn't put future people at risk.
I think you have every right to visit your family, don't you, though, wherever they might be on the planet? It's a bit harsh to say because your folks are in Iran, you can't. Do you not think that's a bit harsh to say because they're in Iran, you can't go there, Jason?
No, I've got a current friend whose family ran from Iran probably 45 years ago. Right. And she's never been back since because she knows as soon as she steps off the plane, because of where her family were and what her family were, she'd immediately be arrested.
Right, OK. So lastly, what your overview of that press conference yesterday afternoon?
It would have been nice for her to say thank you.
I'm delighted to say I'm joined live by Rebecca Ratcliffe, who is Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's sister-in-law. Thank you so much for coming on the programme this afternoon on what must just be a incredibly surreal day. Tell us, if you would, where you were and how you found out that Nazanin was coming home.
This morning I found out in my house that Nazanin had been taken to the airport from Richard's. He'd sent a text message, and in fact it was just now when I was on a different interview, a different station, I found out that she was finally on the aeroplane and is coming home after all these years, which is just fantastic.
I was going to ask you how you feel about it, but it must be very hard to describe.
Yeah, I get a bit emotional, to be honest. I think, lots of tears and with joy. It's just a wonderful moment for us. And boy, have we had some bad times over the last 6 years. We've had some good times as well, but, we felt close before and it's never happened. And so, although her passport was returned, we just didn't know whether she was going to be freed or not. So to find out she finally is on that plane home, you couldn't describe the joy we were feeling.
Tell us about the darker moments, because this has been in the news headlines for some time, based on actually the campaign of Richard, amongst others, and the family, that has kept it in the public's mind for some time. But as with all news events, they slip in and out of the headlines. But for you, this is a constant, ongoing battle. Were there moments where you thought that she would never come back?
No, I don't think you can go through something like the campaign like we've gone through with the belief of doubt. You haven't got time for that. It would just destroy you. So you have to keep positive, and you have to know in your heart, and we did know in our hearts that she was coming home. But there are definitely times when you think that coming home time isn't anytime soon, and that's the hard part, isn't it? We've always known she's coming home, but we didn't know whether she's going to come home tomorrow, a year's time, 5 years, 10 years time. And every time we got a step back, like last year where she should be finishing a sentence, but she got given a 2-year sentence again. It's just soul destroying. You just think this is never, can it not end? But you pick yourself up again, you do your next campaign, you see all the support out there on social media and the mainstream media, you meet all these lovely people in the street, and it buoys you to keep going further until finally today comes and we see those pictures and she's on that flight.
Alex is in Warwickshire. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hi, I just want to say how proud I'm part of Nazanin's family. I'm Richard's cousin, and just how proud we are of how Nazanin has handled everything. She's been back in the country for 4 days after having been stuck in Iran for the last 6 years.
Yes.
And how eloquent she was yesterday, how amazingly proud we are of both what she and Richard have done. I mean, the lengths that Richard's gone to as well.
Yes.
They're both just absolutely amazing people.
Have you spoken to them yet? Have you spoken to them in the last 4 days?
We've had Zoom calls, yes. So,
fantastic. Were you surprised then? I'll ask you, were you surprised that it wasn't... do you know, well, two things really. The little bit of contradiction between the two of them, where I said I respect to Richard. I thought it was lovely. I think every husband and wife in the world would have been going, "Oh yeah, okay." So they're going to have a minor domestic in front of the world's cameras about whether or not they should be expressing gratitude to Liz Truss. Were you surprised at that? I mean, you obviously know her a hell of a lot better than the rest of us do, or was that just you just thinking that's Nazanin? Here she goes.
So no, not at all. But let's face it, you've got to be a very strong lady to actually get through 6 years, including 30 days in solitary confinement. You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
She did this in a room the size of a double bed with a blanket to lie on, a blanket under her pillow as her pillow, and a blanket over the top of her. 30 days being like that. On top of the 6 years of missing out on her daughter going to school, her first days at school, brushing her hair, giving her a kiss goodnight, reading stories. She's gone from a baby to an 8-year-old, well, virtually an 8-year-old. So, yeah, she's missed out on so much. I had no idea what Richard was going to say, no idea what Nazanin was going to say, but I'm just so immensely proud of having watched her on the news conference yesterday. She's just such an amazing woman, absolutely amazing.
What do you think they'll do next? What do you think they'll do next? Because I mean, it's early days, of course, and I sense that it was absolutely sincere when she joked about Gabriella saying she was only going to be famous for a week, and they want to go back to normal life. But it would be a loss, I think, for the rest of us if they did fade it back into the background.
Do you know what? I have no idea what they'll go on to do. But actually,
it's worse than the press conference yesterday, that. I might as well have asked what television programme she watched first.
Yeah, no, I have absolutely no idea. But actually, just seeing them as a normal family now, seeing all three of them just being back, having mummy back, doing the things that we all take for granted, it's just lovely. And I sort of think about, there's only a few people, thankfully, that have got this terrible idea. But actually, if your neighbour stole some money or kept the money, and you went to prison in England, if that happened to your neighbour and you were sent to prison for their debt, would you go out and say thank you to them for paying the debt back?
No.
I'm not convinced many people would. No. And if you then put on, it's actually not even an English prison, you've been in solitary confinement. She was so weak when she first saw Gabriella for the first time. She couldn't pick her up.
Is that right?
Less than 2, and she couldn't pick her up because she'd lost so much weight and so much. She couldn't walk properly. She was having blackouts. Her hair was falling out. I think people have now, now forgetting the harsh reality of what she went through for all that 6 years. It hasn't just been that she's been at home with her mum and dad. Yes, thankfully, since COVID, she's had some time at her parents' house. But no, Gabriella had to walk through the prison with a sack over her head, so she didn't know where mummy was being held in the prison.
Good God.
I mean, it's such a horrific thing. And she should be.
I'm afraid we're going to have to acknowledge this bizarre chapter of the so-called culture war. Apparently, she should be grateful that only went on for 6 years, despite the fact that the British government could have ended it at any point during that period.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I was so, again, proud of her for yesterday, that was her moment to be saying, yes, this is all about me, but she didn't. They also brought along Roxanne as well, so she could talk about her dad.
Yeah.
So in the moment when she should have been at her most, like, oh, isn't this amazing? Wasn't she brilliant? Saying, actually, it's not just me. There's so many. I was a lucky one. People talk about me. There's so many out there that nobody's talking about, which to me was just shows how lovely and sweet-natured she is. She's just such a lovely lady.